On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about the user interface, something that can be a challenge, but also a highlight of a system. We talk about the impact of mobile and how to approach a user interface to make it successful. All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Peerless AV, the official outdoor display provider of the Daytona International Speedway.
A State of Control, episode 33. The interface is the system.
This is A State of Control.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that focuses on the control, programming, and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'll be your host today. Today we have an interesting show that takes us in a little bit of a different direction. Normally we talk about programming and code and how we get projects done and the meat and potatoes. But today we're going to talk more about the creative side of things. We're going to talk about the user interface. And that's sometimes something that programmers will struggle with because they may be good code writers, but they're not necessarily graphic artists and don't have an eye for these types of things. But it's very important, and it's something that is the front end and something that the user identifies with. So with me to talk about this exciting topic is a few experts, and I think we're going to have a nice conversation about how the user interface impacts the AV system, and then also different approaches that programmers can use to provide a user interface that is high quality. So let's first start off with our favorite uncle, Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa. How are you today, Rich?
Good. Mellow West Coast greetings. I'm glad that we are not only nationally, but now internationally known with our collection of experts today. So looking forward to a good show.
We have been, too. We have
been. So, yeah, this is our Hands Across the Continents episode.
So to lead on with that, we welcome Oliver Hall from AVNation, and you're coming to us from the UK. Thanks for being on.
Thanks very much for having me. And sunny regards from Liverpool. Excellent.
And last but not least, somebody who I've known for a while and somebody who is instrumental in the Infocom dashboard for controls and in defining some of the guidelines for user interface design. His name is Paul Chavez from Harmon. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, Steve. How's it going? Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be able to talk to one of my favorite subjects here. So look forward to getting our ideas going.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
So Rich, let's kick this off with you, and we have a lot that we want to cover today. When you approach your typical projects, the user interface obviously is important, and we know when we're talking about residential, it's a little bit different than talking about commercial, but how do you actually start that conversation and lay out a user interface to get the user to adopt it, to get their buy-in, and because it is something that's subjective?
Oh, it's absolutely subjective. It's funny. It's I'd say probably for about the last decade, every meeting I have with a client, we always talk about what wind up being our basic principles of automation, right? And we talk about humans. We're creatures of habit. And really the purpose of automation is to identify habits and then to streamline them. And I tell them really in the house, we've got some basic functions that we look for just in simple automation. People just want it. They want it warmer. They want it cooler. They want it louder. They want it softer. They want it brighter. They want it dimmer. They want it on. They want it off. Our job is to do those 8 things first as simply as possible. And then we take a step back from that and say, okay, now here are the other things that based on your needs, and this is where there is a deviation between resi and commercial. And residential, in a home, it is going to be a reflection of not only their style, their design aesthetic, the architecture. You may have an interior designer who wants to chime in at times. I mean, there is a lot more blending in because it is something very personal. In a boardroom, you have a different approach. You are looking at multiple users, but in a home, you already know who the user is. So from that standpoint, with the user interface experience, we focus specifically on, here are the things that we have found that most people enjoy. Now, you may or may not be most people. From there, we're then going to find a way to streamline the process. And again, like I said, really what we do with our user interface is we focus on what their habits are. And once we establish what their habits are, we drill into those first, and then we work our way out, which isn't always the engineering or the programmer's idea. The programmer's idea is, let's get everything on there because they're going to love it as much as we do. And that is where that line is drawn. And so, it's very hard to straddle both, each half of the brain in that respect. So we do take a bit of a backwards approach in that we believe the interface is all, because if they are not comfortable with it, they won't use it. And then you get I'm scared to touch it because I'm afraid I'll break it. And, anybody's done this for any period of time, you will hear that objection. So we try to go through that first.
I don't think that's backwards at all. For me, that's totally forwards. And I'm glad, Rich, that you started on the end user, because we always start there. And it's interesting. I think the most interesting thing about residential versus commercial is the specific persona, which you were talking about, versus the generalized persona. But whenever we decide to start a system, to develop a system, an interface of some sort, the first thing we do is, who are we designing for? What is that persona? And I think it's a little more challenging on the commercial side, because you don't have a person, you don't have Mr. Jones, you have to sort of say, these sort of 5 people are doing it, and we're going to create one persona, and we're going to design to that. And it's a very important decision. It's one of the most important that interface designer makes.
And I would think that too, there are definitely two schools of thought. And I mean, personally, coming from more of a commercial background, I feel like the appealing to the masses is a little bit easier than appealing to the individual. But I can understand that you can argue it both ways.
I think you're right in one respect, in that if you have a very specific persona, you're going to have to work harder to get the peculiarities of their personality. What Rich said, you're observing what they do. What are their habits? Well, that gets very personal, and it gets very specific. And that means that's probably what keeps Rich in business is personalizing to a very deep level an interface, as opposed to a generalized business interface that actually today is very much informed by the mobile devices that we carry around.
I'm not sure if I'm going to put a fly in the ointment, but I think we come at it from a slightly different position as well. I mean, we sort of go to the client and try to present, I guess, the facade that we are experts in what we're doing, and we've been through this iteration so many times, whereas the client generally is only doing it once or twice maybe. Mm-hmm. But we do try and guide the client in a particular way as well. So, if it's something like source selection or something like that, we try to kind of give them what we believe is the optimal route to that. Obviously we do take on board whatever the client wants as well. And our our main sort of focus is that we're delivering a lot of sort of lifestyle technology, really. We're trying to work around their lives to make their lives easier and more enjoyable, more comfortable. So we do take on exactly what the client's after. But I think we definitely do try and sort of guide them in a particular way.
I will say though, Oliver, you did have a project, and again, Oliver and I kind of worked in the same sandbox, in that you do create bespoke interfaces as well. And there's always that line, and I think what Oliver was saying is a good point, is that you're not reinventing the wheel. You're not starting from scratch with every client and saying, step one, you lay in, as Oliver was saying, we are the experts in what we do. We have thousands of these interfaces out there. Here are things that we found that are successful. And you present that option, and that is the part that is configured slightly, and again, that's a color tweak, that's a button shape. Those are small things, but the overall framework itself, I agree with you, Oliver, is that, we have found frameworks that are beneficial. And even from a top-down approach, some people are system selection first oriented, some people are room selection oriented. And those are two very different approaches that can look similar, but getting from point A to point B are different. Then there's the other part, which is bespoke. And one of the reasons I reached out to Oliver is there was a project that he did recently, which was as bespoke gets. And could you take a second and just talk about that, Oliver?
Well, it was a client that already had a system in the main part of his house, so which was your absolutely traditional AV system with Crestron. And then he had an underground, the basement of the house was just a great big room where he used to park cars. You could probably get 4 or 5 cars in there. And he decided to remodel the entire thing and turn it into this kind of man cave. So I'm guessing that's what you're talking about.
Correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, we ripped the entire thing out. Well, there wasn't much in there really at the start, but we had to take the floor out so that we could sink a turntable into the floor. While the floor was being relaid, we also put loads and loads of sensors in the floor as well, so that as the cars drive in, we can track the movement of the cars through the room, and then we can trigger various events based on that. So we have a state model that sees where we're following the engine block of the car with these magnetic sensors. We see when it lands on a turntable, say, and when it does that, then we have this. We have a number of other sensors like rangefinders and things, and that allows us to say, we present on the user interface, which is in the wall directly in front of the guy as he's driving in. It sort of says parking mode active, and then it says how far you've got, and it goes orange, and then it says parking. Well, we go red at one point because if he goes any further, he's going to drive straight through a glass wall. So there's a lot of disclaimers to sign on that one. But yeah, so I mean, that on top of his standard user interface, we then created a skin for specifically this area, which was very much modeled around the Iron Man kind of idea. So one of the guys in the office, not me, a guy called Mike, he came up with this idea of a sort of very futuristic UI, and we built some Crestron smart graphics controls specifically for that to do sort of rotating turntable stuff. And the overall effect seems to work very well.
Very cool. Well, Oliver, I don't think that we're in conflict at all. Actually, I think that when you're describing a process where you're bringing a lot of expertise to that interface, and I think that's exactly right. The idea that you have a model in your head of who you're designing for, and you're going to give them a combination of who they are and what they need, and the expertise that you bring to the party, to the interface. Based on years of what people can use and can't use. I think that's that is the combination that you start with. You need both. You need the expertise and the model of who you're designing for.
And there are times when the client absolutely insists that they want it the way they want it, despite what we say, and and we say, well, fair enough. We refer to that sometimes as they want a faster horse. That old adage from Henry Ford. You ask a customer what they want, and they'll ask for a faster horse. Yeah.
So Oliver, I'll kind of follow up on that with you. When a client's asking for something that is not recommended, how do you have that conversation? And because it is something that they want, and it's especially when it comes to residential and they're paying the bill, the user interface in my experience is not something that is just artwork. It's something that has to be an application, and it has to be something that is interactive and is scalable and has a lot of different qualities that the average person doesn't think about. How do you have that conversation?
I mean, that was some of the thoughts I was having before we came on this session, was that for us, the user experience or the user interface isn't really just the graphical facade. It's right the way back, right the way through the system, the whole navigation, the organization of controls, how we group things, all the way back through to the features that the systems provide ultimately. So, yeah, I mean, we're in a fortunate position that if we step back to our sort of standard product, I guess, we have demonstration models, as it were, that we can show to a client, and then we can talk the client through how it's not just a case of saying, well, on paper this is how we do it versus what you want to do. We can actually take them through a demonstration of it. So sometimes that works, sometimes they insist that they want it the way they want it, and then I guess you get to that point, and that's when you have to decide whether it's worth the argument, or you just say, okay, well, and then you have an argument, a discussion about whether, if that's going to be custom work or, outside of our standard framework, then
so Oliver, are you saying that you try to present the end user with some kind of an interface at the very beginning of the process? Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
we even have a hard copy document that is like a user guide effectively, which obviously we're doing bespoke systems, so it's not a facsimile of what the system's going to be ultimately, but it gives them a good idea of the various features and the main concepts of, sort of in terms of working with the AV side of the house, or lighting or heating, or all of those kind of things, the standard stuff. And then we build on top of that.
I think that's absolutely right. I think that giving starting with the I've often said the interface is the system, and I think actually you or Rich said it earlier. The interface is the system. They don't care what's behind the closet, really. They're going to be dealing with this device, whatever sort, and that's it primarily. And if something goes wrong with that, they're going to call you. So you got to get that right, and giving them that up front then informs the entire system.
Absolutely. Well, again, I think, in terms of setting expectation, that helps immeasurably, because the worst thing, and we've been there, when we first started out doing this stuff, when you don't have a framework, you don't have existing work to demonstrate and stuff like that, you do end up going through 90% of the project before the client gets any visibility of what they're going to actually
exactly right.
End up with. And it invariably doesn't end well if they had a different idea of what they were going to receive. So showing something early on. We do try and adopt an agile kind of methodology in all of this as well. So we do try and deliver things early on and rapidly so that they know what they're getting.
I will say, and a point to this that Oliver makes, is we do the same thing, is my feeling is that for anybody who is in this business currently, with the advent of mobile and high-speed internet, if you're not walking around with a mobile device, either a tablet or a handheld device and don't have a live demo, then you need to rethink that process. Every meeting we have, immediately I have, here at the lab, I have two processors, one that runs a version for a handheld device, another one that runs for a tablet, and we pull up a live demo. And then we need to go further, because again, it is that interaction process. It is that touch, smell, taste, the whole thing. But additionally, and even in a boardroom now, or even in any residence, they're going to generally be interacting with the mobile device at some point. So you're already getting that first chance for that iteration. For us, it's even more interesting, because what's been happening is this trend that we have to follow with some of the larger manufacturers who completely change their UI approach, who go from a skeuomorphic design, which is kind of the rounded, beveled, glossy buttons, to completely flat. So all of a sudden, I kind of harken back to, I remember my first touch panel software was not software. We drew on the touch panel. Then I got happy when we went to Grayscale. And then I was ecstatic when my first piece of software had 16 colors to choose from. And I had round, oval, rectangle, and square as my shapes. And the keys to the kingdom were handed to me.
But they're really all still square.
They are all still square. And so it's so funny seeing kind of this boomerang back to it, where we have all of this raw processing power and these graphics and the pixels, and that is something that we are also having to look at, that I don't think we speak to as much, which is we also do have to consider the trends that are out there, because you could provide a brand spanking new interface that looks dated, and then all of a sudden to the client, without any other perception other than what they see when they pick up their mobile device or their computer or anything else, they feel that it's old. And we've had that conversation with a couple of clients where, we've had the same framework, but stylistically, it didn't work with them. There was a dissonance that occurs. And so for me, user interfaces, it's what I love. I love the psychology of delving into what makes them like it, what makes them hate it. And somewhere in between, and hopefully if they like it, I get paid. So, but, Paul, how have you guys dealt with that? Because I know that, we've had a struggle with it.
Well, one of the things that we do as a practice, and that I think is something that we're adopting from the general software design industry, is that we try to stay almost, you might say, graphic agnostic as long as possible, right, with wireframes. And wireframes are part of the research project for us. and ideally as much of a cartoon as possible. I don't know if any of you have read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, but that in that has a really great example of why you don't want to put too much detail in something early on. You want to leave it a framework, and then as you go, you understand better what the client's aesthetic is, and then you can merge the two. And the visual design, often is a whole different discipline as well as the research part of it. So at least in Harmon, we have a lot of we have people that have expertise in user research design, and then different people that are involved in interface design.
I think that's an incredibly important part of this discussion, that whereas before maybe we were talking about, if we're talking to a programming community, we were talking about one guy wearing, a designer's hat, an interface design, in terms of the layout and the templating of user interface and the whole the workflow and all of that kind of stuff, and the programming. I feel as though now we're at a point now where the technology is taking us to a point where you do need people who now understand or are proficient in graphic design and getting that kind of stuff right, because it's very easy to overdo it. And I think that's the sort of the temptation for people who aren't graphic designers, that they start adding drop shadows on everything and blah, 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 transparency everywhere. And it can become a mess very quickly.
I know. I consider myself fairly aware of graphic design and having a good eye. And every single time that I work with a real UI graphic designer, they just they go further, and it's more beautiful and better in every way.
And I would say that there's a lot of tools out there available online, not only with individuals out there, but I remember when we hired our first graphic designer, the concept of white space was explained to me. And I went, oh, okay, leave things alone, let it be, let it rest. I admit, much to my chagrin, at some point in the 90s, when Crestron made Comic Sans available to me as a font, I fell into that trap. Everything looked like a Looney Tunes commercial, and you kind of look back. But I think for integrators,
I think a virtual slap on the wrist.
It was. But you can see, and I think that, in this community and everybody that we're talking to, that you have to be willing to make those kind of mistakes early on and see where, you don't have to do it all. And I think sometimes the hardest part in our community is generally we're dealing with really smart, men and women. They are very, very intelligent people who have the ability, probably, if they put their mind to it, to do it. The hardest part sometimes is stepping away and saying, okay, where is the collaboration? Where do our strengths and weaknesses come in? And there's lots of communities out there that are allowing it. I know that, Adobe has a great community out there that just the principles of user interface, just the basics, layout, sightlines, and even just color palettes. There's so much that goes along with it, that if you are truly interested, and again, there's a choice. You still got to get paid, still got to get the work done, you still got to get the job out there, and so, if you're doing 50 huddle spaces, you want to get it close, you want to get it right, you want to get it done, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with, with taking that extra effort. And again, a company has, a brand. They do have people who are image handlers, and so, when you are in that commercial space, I think, the interviewing process, I think, sometimes doesn't get as much attention as it should, because we worry about do you need this codec? Do you need this microphone? Do you need 20 microphones? Are there people? No, what does the company do? What is their message? They have a community message, all of these things. And that's what makes the holistic portion, here we go, West Coast, Uncle Richie, but the holistic portion of the user interface design comes together.
So one of the things
we're all nodding here like dogs. We're all.
Well, one of the things that we touched on, and I think it's an important part of the conversation, is the impact of mobile. So, Oliver, I'll start with you. What have you seen, and how have your interfaces changed with the impact of mobile, and then how do you take that into consideration? Because I know it comes up quite a lot in terms of they want it to be as easy as the iPhone or as easy as something that they're accustomed to using.
Yeah, I guess for me, there's two elements to that. One is, what's the impact been of mobile on us? And for me, I think it's been an unmitigated success. It's been absolutely fantastic. It's pushing forward the understanding in the in the home automation industry. People get what a touch panel is now. They're comfortable with it. It's helped immeasurably, and I guess the amount of R&D that the likes of Apple and co do in terms of user interface design is just we're all benefiting from that. In terms of when it actually gets applied to our systems, I have to say that we take a sort of we try and guide the clients in as much as to use specific devices for AV functions. So we prefer to have dedicated devices in that context, and then use the mobile devices as supplementary devices. So really, it's just what's the best. So this is less about user interface design in terms of the graphical user interface design, but just in terms of the interaction with the system. Sometimes the best thing is the thing that you have in your hand that you have tactile feedback over, and you're looking at the screen ahead of you. It isn't necessarily staring at a tablet screen and stuff like that. But then in other use cases, then it is a good thing. So I don't know. I don't see that mobile devices is the sort of panacea to home automation control, but it's finding the right.
I mean, you're right. I mean, they changed everything for us in some ways because we rely as designer, we've relied on that knowledge in the world, and there was very little touch screen knowledge in the world. People's experiences with touch screen were so limited until 2007, and then all of a sudden everyone had experience with touchscreens, and that was a radical change to everyone that had been designing touchscreens for 15 years or so before that, right?
I mean, it's put the pressure on as well, though, because as soon as Apple brought their devices out, then everyone's questioning why some of the big manufacturers' touch panels don't perform quite as well as the mass market gear does.
Absolutely.
Rich, you touched on trends, and I want to dig a little bit deeper into that because I think that's something that's critical, and I think it's not only something that is an aesthetic part of the system, but it's also something that you can design a good user interface, but if it looks dated, people already have a perception about it. But also you don't want to get caught up in something that may be a fad. What's a good approach to that? And is it something that you kind of push on it out there, or is it something you respond to?
It's interesting. It's and again, it's going back to mobile. I went on record, probably in the early AVNation broadcasts of, I was kind of the guy with banging his shoe on the table going mobile, and, nobody would believe me. And, oh gosh, it'll never replace, the existing panels that we had. And lo and behold, here we are, 10 years later after the iPad and the phone were developed. As it stands, it's a constant challenge for us. The reason being, and we're looking, in terms of our approach, again, I'm in the heart of Silicon Valley. So it's even more hyper realized for us because we've got people who are looking at VR, looking at AR. They are now, we're dealing more and more with smartwatches. We're seeing more of these devices, health tracking. I mean, all of these things that are starting to come out that, not only are we talking about people's homes necessarily, now we're talking about their personal information and accessing that information. Here in the Silicon Valley, again, energy. Solar is huge right now. Energy. I know for a fact that, here in the lab, we're charged like a 4x surcharge because we use up too much energy. We're switching over to solar because we have to, because there is that focus towards managing your energy, your footprint, everything else as it relates to these trends. What we're finding is that we're having to be more flexible in our framework. And there's a company who I know who makes a great little piece of adaptive software that helps us manage our graphics and our skins and easily move from one modality to the other. So what we've done is we created a basic framework. And in our framework, we have a flat framework. We have kind of a skeuomorphic framework, and then we have kind of a cross-matching, kind of what our special seasonings. And what we do programmatically on the fly at this point is we call it up based on, okay, this is all pretty similar. These things all kind of fly out. If it's just the look, we're going to go ahead and change some of the dressing. But that's required a significant amount of work under the hood because from a memory management processing standpoint, on a traditional touch panel, it's challenging. With mobile devices, faster processors, more memory, we can get away with a lot more. Our problem right now is kind of bridging that gap where we can maximize across all of them. And then on top of it, a tablet or a touch panel are typically in landscape mode. A phone is in portrait mode. We have to optimize based on even that, or even if they're left-handed or right-handed. So probably what I get out of this and the conversation is work with people who understand people, and that element of it. Because yes, we are the experts in delivering that product, but at the same time, there's experts who know just how people interact with things. And so, and everything comes out of it. And I think that, we raise the bar from it. For us, it's a challenge. So to answer your question, we're having to do 3 different types and kind of lay in wait until they decide which one they want.
So would you say that the user interface is something that attracts customers to you, the way you do it and the way you lay it out, or is it more of a conversation that you have once you've established the relationship?
I'd like to think that that's part of what sets us apart. Not only the look, but the feel. There is and I think Oliver will also agree to this, that once a user interface is right, it's intuitive. There is that nature to it. It's just your hand automatically goes to where you think it should go. Everything kind of flows with it. The information presents itself in a manner that people expect. That comes from doing it a lot and being able to kind of distill it to, here's what most people do, and the flexibility to be able to say, okay, that didn't quite work for that person. You have to build some flexibility. I think that if you kind of go in with the mindset that this is the only way we do it, this is how we do every boardroom, this is how we do every huddle space, this is how we do every residence under 5,000 square feet, I think you're painting yourself into a corner. With that said, there is the ability for, it's an economy of scale. If you want to get 100 of these out, you got to kind of settle in on something. And you got to be able to sell it as a package and say, this is what we do, this is what we go, no coloring outside the lines. But after that point, you do need to decide, where you're going to go with the flexibility in the future. Because something's going to change. There's going to be a manufacturer who's going to change it and flip it on its head again. So might as well be prepared for it. It's not like it's not going to happen again.
I think that's a perfect lead into my last question, because we're going to run out of time. But Paul, tell us a little bit about your role at Harmon and how we spoke a little bit about how the software that you work with actually helps to define the user interface.
We're working on a number of different projects. Some of our user interfaces are sort of direct control, and others are tools, to create user interfaces. Right? I mean, traditionally, AMX's suite of tools has been around for a long time and allowed people to do a lot of things. And we need to evolve those set of tools into newer, more contemporary tools, which is part of what I'm working on at Harmon. And I think Richie points to a couple of things that are a big challenge for us. The diversity of interfaces, on one hand, as a real user experience advocate, I really love the diversity of devices that we have in the world today, because it allows, I wrote recently a column, and I think the diversity allows people to almost have an intuitive experience. I've never liked that word intuitive, because none of these technology experiences are truly intuitive. But if you can talk to a device, or if you can touch a device, or if you can see the information on your wrist, it actually can become a lot more intuitive. But it makes for our job much, much harder, because now we have to support just everything. We have to support all these devices, AR and VR and mobile and all of these things. So this is our role is expanding on the device side. It's expanding on the expertise side. We have more and more people that are focusing on very specific things. Our design team can be 15 people for software design these days. So really wrapping our arms around that and having the resources and spending the money, which a lot of people in the audio industry don't necessarily have a sense for, because we haven't really done it in the past. All those things are kind of where we're pushing our organization, I think.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we are short on time, but it's another great topic that I think we'll be continuing the discussion on, and hopefully we'll find some comments on our site and maybe have a follow-up, because there's certainly a lot more to discuss. But this is something that I think should have provided a good foundation for programmers to be able to learn a little bit about the importance and impact, as well as have some resources for learning how to develop a nice user interface design. Well, thank you guys for being here today. Rich, I'll start with you. Rich Fregosa from Fregosa Design. Thank you for being with us. And how can the audience reach out to you and get a hold of you?
You can find me on the interwebs, fregosadesign.com, Twitter @rfregosa. You can always find us here on AVNation, here at State of Control, also on Resi Week. And, and also look for me every once in a while on CE Pro or Electronic House. And I will make sure that Oliver does plug a very cool piece of software that he makes. So leading in.
Well, with that lead in, Oliver Hall, thank you for being with us today from AVNation. How can everybody reach out to you? I appreciate you being on with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm Oliver Hall. You can get me on www.ultimation.com, which is the website. Or, for Richard's benefit, if you want to go to shop.ultimation.com, then we have an online shop there with a number of modules. It's all Crestron focused, but there's a product on there called Theme Creator, which is, I think, what Richard's talking about. And that's we hope, a streamlined tool for generating Crestron smart graphics themes. So, there we go.
Very good. Thank you. And last but not least, Paul Chavez from Harmon. Thanks for being with us today.
Sure, yeah, I really enjoyed it, and this is a topic we definitely should talk more about as the the process is evolving and maturing. I think for UI design, where I can be reached at paul.chavez@harmon.com. I'm on Twitter as PMC Waterrock with 2 R's, and also the real simple one there. And then occasional column in System Contractor News. You can see me talking about these topics as well. So thanks again.
Thank you. Well, my name is Steve Greenblatt. I've been your host today. I can be reached at Steve Greenblatt on most social media channels. My website company is Control Concepts, or we're at controlconcepts.net. What's important to us is that you visit our website, avnation.tv, and take a look at the other writers. They're those who help keep the lights on here and help us to support our efforts. So please visit our underwriters, tell them thanks. And also take a look at some of the other important shows on the channel. As Rich alluded to, Resi Week is a weekly show. EdTech is a monthly show. There's ITAV, and there's also Connected, and I think that those would all appeal very well to this audience. So check those out at avnation.tv. That's all we have for today for A State of Control. Thanks for being with us.